special guest with us tonight. We have with us Michael Johns, the co-founder of the Tea Party and former White House speechwriter. So momentarily, I will be bringing them both on, my co-host and Michael Johns. But before, I just want to talk with you about a couple of things here. I've been watching the news and media, and I find it quite interesting that on Friday, China, of all countries, decided to lecture the U.S. on human rights. Who saw that coming? Would have never imagined that China, of all countries, would lecture the U.S. But they did. And what did we have to say? Well, stay tuned, we'll find out. Also, we'll be discussing North Korea and Iran, and Putin challenged Joe Biden to a live debate. What did Joe do? What did Joe say? Well, Joe's team just deflected, pretend as if though it didn't happen. Folks, this does not look good for the United States, especially considering on Friday, Joe stumbled not once, not twice, but thrice, going up the steps of Air Force One. Joe is challenged. There are some issues that are there clearly with Joe. While the mainstream media wants to pretend as if though there's nothing there to see, there is a lot to see. And their silence is golden. And because they're not talking about it, we should be concerned about it. Lastly, let me say, there are a lot of people taking the vaccine. That's Trump's vaccine. I haven't taken the vaccine. President Trump and his wife have taken the vaccine. What are my thoughts on the vaccine? You should consult with your physician. I'm not a physician. Eventually, I will probably take it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But what I do find interesting is that a lot of the naysayers who attacked Trump and said that he would fail with Operation Warp Speed are now taking the vaccine, taking the Trump vaccine. Joe Biden has taken the Trump vaccine. Kamala Harris has taken the Trump vaccine. And I'm sure a lot of your relatives and friends that did not vote for Trump and thought that Trump was the evil orange man have taken the Trump vaccine. Al Sharpton, of all people, put out a picture of him. He's taken the Trump vaccine. Now, some will say, oh, Trump had nothing to do with this. I beg to differ, because it was under President Trump that he got all of the pharmaceutical companies to work together to produce the Trump vaccine in warp speed. Now, some of you would look at this and say, oh, there's nothing to do about it. No big deal. Oh, it is a big deal, because at no time in history has this ever happened. So those of you who are saying it's no big deal and that it's not Trump's vaccine, that just shows you how much you know about history. It also proves the point that you're probably listening and engaging the lying mainstream media, the same media like the Washington Post that lied about Trump and a conversation that he had. Now, of course, it was in the media, but a small little excerpt saying that they made a mistake, but that's a huge, big deal. So I would say to all of you who are still suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, it is thanks to President Trump that we have a vaccine. It is thanks to President Trump that many of you are taking your vaccine, and hopefully, and soon, if Dr. Fauci will allow you, will let you, you'll be back together again with your family. So without further ado, I will bring on my co-host, Small Town Andrew. How's it going, Andrew?
It's going well, Rob.
And our special guest, Michael Johns. Michael, how is it going?
Good. How you guys doing? Good to be with you.
Good. Well, thank you. We can't wait to hear your insight on foreign affairs and everything that's happening now. Now, I opened up the show talking about foreign affairs in relationship to China, and I know that there are a lot of moving parts. So we'll definitely want to get your take on it, since you've been so close to the subject matters and the White House, having been a speechwriter for George Bush. But before we go into that, what are your comments on my opening statement?
I'm with you. I think, if you want to look here at this going on 2 months of Biden administration and identify anything positive, I think you would really struggle. I mean, clearly in these 40 executive orders has, unleashed a broad range of problematic scenarios, some of which are unfolding right away, as in the border crisis, which is an extraordinary crisis, and some of which are simply a matter of time. By no metric do I think you would look at this country now and conclude, and we all knew this, of course. I mean, at least the three of us did. I suspect most of our viewers did. But he kind of implied, you hear this from candidates, and sometimes it's true, and most times not. And sometimes it's true that he had sort of solutions that were sort of on the bookshelf that he was going to pull off. This pandemic would right itself correctly and immediately, simply because he had some secret recipe that he wasn't sharing with the rest of the world. Of course, he had no such recipe. As vaccination levels are on par with what Trump was giving, and all of the other accomplishments, as you correctly point out, including, most importantly, the expeditious, unprecedented speed with which the vaccine was developed. Never in American history or in global history for that matter, has a effective vaccine been developed in that time frame, or anything even close. I think the next closest was roughly 4 years. Mm-hmm. And the average vaccination development, pharmaceutically absent, public-private partnerships, and obviously all the things that Trump orchestrated here, is more like a decade. The only thing I can say is I'm not one of these individuals who looks at our president and wishes him ill when he's dealing with hostile foreign powers. And I think the political divide in this country is so great that I wouldn't even dispute the fact that those sort of sentiments exist among some. I think they were reflected in a lot of the approaches that were taken toward Trump. I mean, including when he met with Putin, including when he met with Xi Jinping, including when he was famously trying to navigate the crucially important North Korea situation, and his first trip to Saudi Arabia, which they jumped all over him on, which was his first state visit abroad. So just to go through it, relief checks on day one. Not only did that not happen, but it happened, going on 2 months later with no Republican support. Mm-hmm. Unity that he promised in the inauguration speech, completely 100% lacking. There is literally no effort that's been exerted by this president to even put forward any symbolism of political unity in this country. He's inflamed divisions. He's disparaged opponents. His press secretary has disparaged the former president. And they have forced through, predominantly through executive order, immensely alienating and counterproductive policies, sort of the worst on both fronts. They don't unify, and they're not going to work either. Mm-hmm. Which is going to leave them in quite the situation come 2022, because I don't really see any signs economically, maybe some employment signs sector-wise, but it's a mixed bag, that things are going to improve on this guy's watch. And then, of course, the fact that the representation that he had some sort of secret solution to these very complicated, difficult foreign relationships is proven utterly untrue. This Anchorage semi-summit is sort of going to conclude with just about no progress, with the exception of some words to maybe continue talking. Well, I'm not even sure that the pretense had been properly set for that meeting. I would have, we just a few months ago labeled this government genocidal in its behaviors with the Uyghurs, and I think honestly, as an act of goodwill, on some front, if not multiple fronts, there should have been some degree of compromise or goodwill exerted by the Communist Party of China toward the United States before we're agreeing to pretty high level meetings. I mean, it's not a state visit. but you've essentially the highest individuals in Beijing's foreign ministry and the highest individuals in our State Department participating in it. So, and then just you look at this economic plan. I mean, now we're going to come back. By the way, a question, even the use under Senate procedure of the reconciliation process that he's relying on, that was developed to circumvent the Senate cloture rule only really for the purposes of the annual budget. It wasn't designed to be utilized for increasing taxes or building transportation systems in Silicon Valley or things that were unrelated to that. And again, where's the Republican leadership? Pretty lacking, in my view. I mean, we didn't send these guys there just to talk about these issues or to make our points. We sent them there to get things done legislatively and politically on policy level. Plenty of us making these arguments, but even on that fallback position, I mean, they just seem completely missing. And importantly, and finally, I'll just observe that this November 3 election that's had well documented, let's call them improprieties, I guess, to be diplomatic, has been unaddressed by, not surprised that the Democrats haven't addressed it, but by both parties. I mean, like literally after all of this rhetoric about foreign intervention in our elections, and Russia did a few things in 2016, but nothing measurable that had any impact on even one state. All the attention that was placed on these things, we're just going to let this Navarro report, an extensive report documenting thousands of individual firsthand cases and witnesses, evidence of which exists, apparently just sit there untouched. And the 1.9 trillion, look, I mean, I'm very open-minded as it relates to the fact that we need stimulus in this economy right now. I haven't looked at, say, what the hardcore libertarian solution is to a pandemic of this magnitude, but it's very difficult to envision navigating through it without some degree of governmental engagement, given the sweeping and immensely significant challenges that we confront. And then, one of the biggest is the employment issue. So what's the singular worst, what are like the worst fiscal and public policy steps you could take when you have, by the government's calculation, about 10 million Americans right now out of the labor force trying, diligently to get back into it. And as you and I know, the unemployment numbers reported by this government are far from perfect. They don't represent 100% of the individuals who are out of work and seeking work. They write people off after a period of time when they haven't been working. And in essence, it's a poll. A lot of people don't even realize that. It's not there's no documented calculus that goes into it. It's supposed to be a reliable poll conducted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics at the Commerce Department. But they literally call people and ask questions. So same individuals have had some trepidation about that, and should now. And then, the number of Americans not in the labor pool, it's tens of millions of Americans. Okay, so what are the worst two things you could do? In my judgment, it would be, you want employers to have discretionary income at their disposal to hire people and to expand their businesses or to reinvest in their startup operations. Though a singular last thing you would want to do would be to take a pretty considerable 21% corporate rate and move it up. Take more money out of employers' hands precisely at the moment when we're trying to incentivize them to spend that money in bringing people back into the labor force, and into absorbing the costs associated with this pandemic. You can't really ask anyone in this administration what their reasoning is behind that, because you'll just get cliches like paying your fair share and things of that nature. The key here is to get this economy humming again on the metrics that matter most, which are employment, wages, gross domestic product, maybe trade balances. And then the second thing you absolutely would never do with a labor surplus would be to incentivize an expansion of illegal and legal immigration, which they quite consciously have done. I mean, I don't believe there's any singular issue this administration feels more passionate about or has invested more time in thinking over than the fact that they believe vastly greater, many millions more foreigners, without a whole lot of consideration. It doesn't really matter who in their mind, but just a lot of foreigners should be brought into this country. And you see that in the absolute retreat from border security, the absolute re-embrace of catch and release, the end of the stay in Mexico policy, which was not a long-term solution, but at least Trump had developed some degree of stability there, where the border crossings had diminished considerably, and the wall construction, which was I think 400 miles on a border that's about 1,700 miles roughly, or 1,800 miles. So it's wasn't complete. We could talk about why, but you would have continued. Why would you dismantle that effort? And in fact, we're going to absorb all kinds of costs associated with disengaging from the wall construction that might exceed the actual costs that would be affiliated with constructing it. So on every conceivable front, I don't think this administration is articulating the biggest challenges that we're confronting. I think it has an inflated view of how it's managing the pandemic. I'm not quite sure it is. You talk about listening to science and executing on a plan. I mean, the science couldn't be more clear cut on the issue of opening schools. Why are they not open? I think the economic science and the criminal statistics and the drain on public welfare resources and public resources is also pretty clear cut, that immigration is going to hit each one of those metrics negatively. On what basis would you possibly do that? And these are not, so we have an asylum program in the country, but these are not asylum candidates that are arriving. And they weren't during the Obama administration either, for the most part.
Right.
They're economic migrants, or they're individuals who are caught up in human trafficking, or in other transport efforts. Some of them have been abducted. Think about the most extreme case, because one of my arguments is that we often get these things so wrong, where we're depicting an open border and sort of this perceived welcoming of these illegals as being a humanitarian undertaking. Individuals are dying as a result of the policy. They're dying on the way here. They're being killed on the way here. They're being raped on the way here. And many of them, particularly the unaccompanied minors, have never expressed any degree of consent to be brought here.
Now, Michael, we obviously do have a crisis on the border. We read today that Joe Biden's spending millions of dollars to host some of them in hotel rooms. They're talking about sending some up to the Canadian border. It's just been a huge disaster for the Biden administration. How does he make it stop after all of his rhetoric going into the election, promising illegals free health care, free education? Is he going to have to change his tune to get this crisis at the border to stop, or do the Democrats just not care?
Doesn't seem to me that they care. I mean, because let's just walk through it. Number one, they refuse to label it a crisis, despite the fact that they have deployed FEMA assets and FEMA resources to the border, which definitionally is only deployed in the case of a crisis, despite the fact that this is multi-hundreds of billions of dollars in public welfare costs that are being imposed. By the way, that's a documentable fact. It's not speculation, at least based on historical trends. Makes sense too. I mean, you're going to bring in individuals. The average education of the Latin America-based migrants is 7th, 8th grade education in the Spanish language, which doesn't really do too much good in an English-speaking country predominantly. So, from the standpoint of employment, from the standpoint of education, you're already limited. And this has been one of the crises that's been confronting public education all over this country. It's not just the border states. Every state's a border state. Every city's caught up in this. But can you just imagine the school districts that are having to absorb dozens or hundreds of individuals who are, at that level, say 7th, 8th, 9th grade, and don't speak a word of English? They're having to reallocate educational resources. They're having to expend more than they normally would. It's hugely disruptive, and it's inevitably sort of segregating this population, right? So this idea that they're just going to come up here and assimilate when they, can't speak 10 words of English is, pretty ambitious. And I know they'll respond as they always do, because they're very good in positioning this argument, where they'll find one or two, they'll find a handful of individuals who actually do end up navigating through this and thriving. And I want to be clear, we're not really blaming the migrants themselves. I think all of us put in that situation and basically seeing all, flags being waved to come on in and come on up, and we're going to have free healthcare and free housing and free, and food stamps and basically all of your needs taken care of, and then all the promise that this country, at least historically, is represented, would be inclined to do it. But that doesn't mean that it's completely counterproductive for the people of this country, and it's not in the interests of America, which is why America First, one of Trump's mottos, might have sounded simplistic, but sometimes in the most simple of statements lie the biggest and most thoughtful acts of genius. If America First is not guiding our immigration policy, what is? Mm-hmm. You can't say it's compassion and humanitarianism, because I just got done saying we're doing damage, real damage to people. Both the immigrants are being harmed and Americans are being harmed. And the beneficiaries are drug dealers. They'll benefit, is anyone under any illusions that, the opioid and fentanyl crisis in this country, which Trump was also made good progress with, which was a legitimate national crisis back in 2015-16, is going to worsen again? Particularly if this economy worsens, because there is a correlation.
And not only that, Michael, just going to when you're talking about the drug crisis, the fentanyl, we see that a lot of this is coming through from China, making its way through the border.
95% of it is, firstly, fentanyl is manufactured. So, it's not like grown like marijuana or even easily extracted from, opioid seeds and like some other drugs. This is almost like meth and like crystal meth. It's manufactured, so it's I'm not saying it's a high-end manufacturing job, but it requires people to know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And that's a perfect example, quite honestly, of one of the precedents that would have been very reasonable for Biden to have put in the place of a meeting to sort of say, as soon as we see that China manufactured fentanyl is not arriving across our southern border, killing Americans. It's an incredibly lethal drug, roughly 100 times more potent than heroin. Often taken by individuals, aren't aware they're even taking it, or taken by individuals who haven't taken it for periods of time and their bodies aren't prepared to adjust to it. Suppresses respiration, associated with thousands upon thousands of overdoses. That would be a reasonable statement to sort of say, as soon as we see this improvement on this particular area, we'll be happy to meet. But we got all of these bad practices of China, many of which are worse today than they've ever been, including the human rights climate in China, which, how absurd to take your opening comments that you have China sitting on the UN Human Rights Council, assessing, so here's like literally a country that is 3 million Uyghurs, ballpark, in essence, concentration and forced labor camps. They've killed many of them for the purposes of extracting organs and selling those on the international market or domestic market. They put others into forced labor, some of whom have actually worked on US-based product exports. And they've re-indoctrinated them in complete contradiction to their ethnic and religious orientation. Focused almost on this bizarre Pol Pot-like acknowledgement of Xi Jinping's greatness and teachings.
So, Michael, what do you think the meeting that took place on Friday? I mean, clearly, it didn't look good at all to me when China was able to come back and then lecture us about human rights, and then to say the democracy that we're talking about, not everyone wants it. And then our Secretary of State, in my opinion, in a weak position, said, well, that's not what we're hearing. I couldn't have imagined Mike Pompeo being in that position. That would not have happened. So why did they want this meeting and just to look unprepared for China just to really walk all over us? What are your thoughts?
I think that they are not particularly concerned about China walking all over us. I am not. I mean, I know there's a school of thought out there, and you see this with the opponents of every administration who believes these guys just simply don't know what they're doing, or they don't really understand what China's like. I would not assign that to this administration. I think they understand the situation pretty concretely. I don't even think they're under any illusions about the Uyghur situation. I honestly believe that they are all largely coming from the same academic institutions, the same think tanks, the same schools of thought, all of whom have preached very quietly this global reset under which we're going to surrender our manufacturing base, assume a much more restrained and unremarkable position in the world as China consolidates its position as the economic, political, and incredibly even moral and cultural force around the world. These aren't, and this isn't speculation on my part, this is a plan that they are executing on with immensely smart people. I mean, I don't believe for a whole bunch of reasons that American government often attracts our best and brightest or our hardest working. Seems to attract people with different qualities. In China, really the only way up, it doesn't matter what profession you're in, is through the Communist Party. And if you are particularly extraordinary in your skill sets or any skill set, they're going to put you to leverage in the actual government. So, hopefully Americans know this by now, but they've, just in recent years moved to a president for life. So Xi Jinping is, there until such time as he dies, or until such time as the People's Liberation Army or the CCP, seek to remove him in some sort of revolutionary move. And I don't really get the sense that there's much internal dissent about his leadership for the most part within the government, except that there is a debate, I think, over how much cultural exposure the West should have in China. These guys are, I mean, there's a lot of paranoia. I don't know. There's a Bill Maher stand up. It's about 6 minutes that I put out from last week that I thought captured this perfectly, where he talks about, the risk of the United States becoming a silly people. I mean, what have we been talking about over the last few weeks? Mr. Potato Head and
Right.
Dr. Seuss.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas our primary global competitor in the security area, in the global economy, most clearly, and in diplomatic global leadership, has been executing aggressively and disparaging us, and continuing incredibly not to acknowledge its own responsibility for the release of this pandemic, which, by the way, raises a point that I ought to make a lot more often than I do. If your position is, as the Communist Party of China's position is, that you don't know where this pandemic originated, if you're somehow confused over the fact that it originated in Wuhan, that's, I suppose, okay. But you then have no standing to be presenting yourself to the rest of the world as some sort of expert and bragging of your knowledge and capabilities as it relates to this pandemic. It's
Right.
one or the other.
Well, Michael, I want to just take a step back with something that you had said that I found rather interesting. You said that Biden's team, they're under no illusion as to China's capability, but they're rendering, it seems, to, and correct me if I'm wrong, to give up ground and allowing China to take the lead with the surrendering all our manufacturings and whatnot to China, and the United States, in essence, being second fiddle, if that is the case. I mean, that's a very scary thought, because if that were to happen, China, in essence, has won, and without a doubt, would take over America as we know it to be today. So why would these elitists just, I mean, is this something that they've been planning all along? Well, it's time for America to take the back seat and time for someone else to lead.
Now, this is a book of thought that started to emerge really in like kind of the Henry Kissinger era. That, first it was at that time, I don't think there was the recognition, despite what there should have been with Mao's atrocities, that China, had evil intent. I think it was one of an understanding that we were moving into a global economy, and that China's low labor costs, that its high labor pool, 1.4 billion people, and growing, and its size made it a logical hub for manufacturing and for and for a kind of centralization of global trade. The years, and we were told, and I was personally told, because I want to tell you, like, I dived into this with a lot of curiosity. It is, and I'm not trying to brag, like, I had this right. I'm sure there's other things I've not had right, but this position on China, and I say this as someone who's been to the Republic of China, on Taiwan, who's always been concerned about their independence, who has been concerned about the plight of Hong Kong, who's followed the Tibet situation, has followed the Uyghurs since that started getting the necessary attention it deserves globally. I've always had concern about the direction of this government and been under no illusion that it's guided by Marxist-Leninist principles. It's simply it's Marxism-Leninism in a tux suit. not in a kind of hoodie and ripped jeans like the Soviet Union was. Meaning the Soviet Union sort of came at us, Brezhnev banging the shoe, right, or Khrushchev. You kind of had the overt aggressiveness that they put forward, both in their military approach, in their denunciations of the United States. I mean, they made it very clear that they were an enemy, and they welcomed and they used that domestically, really to maintain political power since, in some respects since the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, but really certainly since the Second World War. And that China, on the other hand, has operated in a much more low-key and sophisticated way, but in also a more comprehensively aggressive way. So you look at their global development plans, enormously strategic and immensely threatening. In Africa, South Asia, Latin America, Caribbean, huge amounts of infrastructure and property being either constructed or bought out by China. They've taken advantage of diminished property values in certain parts of the world. And there is almost no part of the world. I used to say the sun doesn't set on the Soviet Empire, kind of, which was the old position about the British, and the sun doesn't set on the British Empire. Well, when you really think about it in terms of their infrastructure leverage that they've been able to assemble over these last few decades, I think we're almost at the point where that's true in China. And it's soon true in the United States. I mean, I think we had talked a few weeks ago about the fact that Biden, incredibly, and I still haven't seen a competent explanation for this, is now allowing the CCP to invest in our electrical grid, which certainly raises the question that Trump tried to resolve, which is we don't want a foreign and reasonably hostile power to have the ability to impact electrical functionality in this country that would have such a devastating impact.
I mean, I can't.
That, I think, was the second order he signed.
Right, but when you look at this, everything that you're saying, and I know there was Senator Hawley, and there have been a lot of others who've been talking about, or the concern that they have about China.
Chris Smith.
Right, and it's as if though it's falling on deaf ears. And we're talking about, like you said, everything but China, Mr. Potato Head, Dr. Seuss, Meghan Markle, all these other people that are being canceled. And there are serious things that are taking place. And it seems as if though they're putting out this insignificant stuff, important, but also insignificant, considering that I personally think that we're already at war with China, a biological war with the whole COVID-19, aka China virus. And we have all these distractions, and you have Joe tripping up the stairs, tripping over what he's saying, not knowing what he's saying. And then the media, Jen Psaki, they're giving him cover. And then to put the icing on the cake, we got a smackdown in Alaska, and Americans could not respond, but the media is saying, oh, no, we stood up. No, you didn't stand up. Unfortunately, we failed, and it was embarrassing. And then to put the icing on the cake, as I was about to say, you have Vladimir Putin challenging the president to an open debate. Some will say, oh, he was kidding. It doesn't matter if he was kidding. The fact that he's looking at Biden and he's saying, and I hope you're better, it lets us know that everyone is looking at this guy and they're seeing how frail he is. And I don't know how much longer the media is going to try to prop him up and hide him from us. He's supposed to give a press conference this week, and people have submitted their questions, which to me is so unbelievable, so that we can rehearse them.
We'll see how that goes.
It's like, we're at a crisis here, just like the crisis at the border. And people don't realize it. They're thinking that, oh, well, Biden is righting the wrong that Trump put out there, and that we're now respected. As the Secretary of State said, we're telling the world that America is back. Well, America never left. America is now getting lost because
Yeah,
of
on what
policies.
basis would you possibly say that? I mean,
Right.
America is back. Every economic metric is down. We just spent $1.9 trillion that's going to go against our public debt largely, and create, I think, almost certainly some inflationary pressures for the first time in a long time in this economy. You got millions upon millions of Americans out of work. You have hundreds upon hundreds of thousands storming the southern border, 10% roughly of whom are infected with COVID, while we are not allowing individuals to go outside of their homes without masks on. We're allowing individuals who aren't even Americans to enter this country with the design of staying here, without regard to even whether they have the virus. And by the way, this just struck me, and I mentioned it to a few people that said they hadn't thought of it this way. I don't know why we wouldn't have thought of it this way, so I'll just mention it here. We criticized 5 to 10 Democrat governors in this country. Cuomo is the one who got the most attention for very ignorantly putting into long-term care facilities, which, is kind of if you haven't been in a nursing home, it's very similar to a hospital setting, and the way the rooms are, usually 2 people in a room, it's close proximity. And obviously the most vulnerable population, individuals with diagnosed inability to live independently, and often and almost always of an older demographic. And then we wouldn't test them. And, in the case of New York, for instance, I mean, the policy prohibited these facilities from even testing new admission patients on whether or not they had the virus. So at least that was properly pointed out. There, some states have taken some reforms there that at least they've corrected that step. Cuomo's in trouble because of the misrepresentation of the data, which is almost criminal. Other states, a few other states still haven't even adjusted the policy. But what we're doing on the southern border is the same thing, and we're doing it with no justification. In the case, I'm not trying to defend any of these Democrat governors. That was bad policy. It was bad public health policy, and bad in every respect, and it was immensely deadly. But at least we were talking about Americans, and these were Americans who did not have an immediate option available to them as far as where to go. I mean, they were in those facilities because they couldn't live in their homes, or because they didn't have supportive home environments that would, allow them, and it's not even just the issue of their family willingness to do it. Some of these patients just become incapable of being cared for by amateur caregivers. But at least they were Americans. We have no basis at all for these individuals that are now entering the United States. They are not following our processes. They're not coming in through ports of entry. They're not demonstrating any of the indications that would meet the threshold of achieving any degree of permanent amnesty sort of status in this country. They're fleeing poor countries. The world's filled with poor countries, by the way. I mean, if the standard simply is that you can get a better life in the United States than you can in the country you were in, I don't know what the estimates are, but I'm going to ballpark it at 3 billion maybe people who would probably come here tomorrow. And the sad and frightening reality is, don't think that this is constrained to geographic proximity, because we still haven't resolved the legal immigration crisis, where individuals arrive here with 180-day visas and never leave. I mean, and I'm sure, I've encountered people of that nature all the time. Then they're here for a considerable period of time, and they ultimately go through the citizenship application. Many citizens here who are here only because they took the bold and illegal step of, and I'm not blaming them, not disparage them for taking advantage of this obvious loophole that we haven't enforced, but it was illegal, to fly here and take advantage of our lax enforcement measures. And these lax enforcement measures, I want to reiterate, this is just my view, but what else can I offer you? I don't think it's some benign oversight. I don't even think it's poor management. It is a conscious policy. It's been in place for decades. It's designed to build up a surplus labor pool and to deflate wages. That was the original intent of it. And then once Democrats sort of got it in their mind that these individuals likely would ultimately be part of their constituency, given their propensity to welfare dependency, and the fact that apparently they feel those individuals will be more inclined to vote that way, that was game over. If these were Make America Great Again Venezuelans fleeing Maduro and pouring across our border, I'm pretty convinced the Democrats couldn't build that wall fast enough.
Right. I mean, because look back, even a decade ago, you had Obama, you had Hillary Clinton, you had Bill Clinton, you had Chuck Schumer, you had Dianne Feinstein, you had Nancy Pelosi, all of these guys coming out on the floor of the House in the Senate, saying that we need to protect our borders, we need to put up border walls. But just as soon as they realize, like you said, that these could be potential voters, game change. Let's bring them here. Let's get as many here as possible. But if, as you said, these were Venezuelans or the Cubans, that wall would be as high as they could get it. And this is really unfortunate that they could care less about these people. They don't care about their trip here, what they're going through. Some of them are dying. Some of them are being raped. The women are being raped. The kids are being molested. The kids are being, sold out. They could care less. They're being used as mules to carry drugs. They could care less. They're only looking at the vote. So
they're
get them
crossing
here.
the border. This is new, with wristbands on that reflect how much they had paid at various incremental stops along the way, which assumes some degree of indication as far as what their future is going to be. So, for instance, in the few cases where maybe parents or someone had paid, their transport costs and their protection money, because there's a big protection, which is like it's like a mob thing, isn't it? I mean, protection racket. They would ultimately be sort of left alone. And then we know for a fact that, an extraordinary number of individuals, particularly young people, get ushered into both, sexual trafficking and a world they can't break out of, and also into gangs and drugs. And by the way, what precisely are they supposed to be doing for employment when you don't speak the language, haven't been in the country before, are arriving with no assets, no income, no clothes, almost nothing? I mean, is there anyone out there with a straight face saying that that's just Steve Jobs in 6 months? I mean, because I know one or two will emerge ultimately, and we'll know their names when they do. We won't know the names of the Americans who have been killed, that have been acknowledged by the Remembrance Project, great project that is angel moms and dads in the United States, that seeks to keep alive the memories of their lost children from murder and other violent crime committed by illegal aliens. And I saw that as well with the Biden administration, that they've diminished the ICE public reporting on both the release of criminal aliens, and they're seeking to diminish or make it more difficult to obtain statistics on illegal alien crime. Now, why would you want to do that?
Right. Well, I think one of the first
Reason for the same reason they didn't want to throw all these guys into the census, which was another
Right.
huge
Exactly.
Where's the leadership on that too? I mean, we talked about the election issues, but
Oh yeah.
you ponder the absurdity of the low ball number being 11 million, high ball number being 30, even 40 million. I've heard illegal aliens potentially in this country, and you're just going to throw those individuals who are not eligible to vote. You're going to count them as citizens and put them in for the purposes of congressional district allocations in key states around this country and completely disrupt the legal allocation of representative democracy that way as well?
Well, I agree with what you're saying. And I think one of the things that people have to understand is that, as we've been saying here, is that a lot of these individuals are coming over. And we have to be true. We have to deal with the facts. And sometimes the truth and the facts hurt, but we have to deal with them. A lot of them aren't the brightest that are coming over, because if they were, they would be able to come through in a way such that they could come across and then say, hey, I want to apply for citizenship. We are allowing individuals to come over who will come here and then they will become a burden on our system. Now, we are a very kind and considerate country. We are concerned about people, but allowing them to come, the hardships that they're encountering is just inhumane. And then to try and cover up what's happening, not allow reporters to go down and see the facts, not that some of the reporters from MSNBC or the Washington Post or would report the facts. I don't know what they're afraid of, but we have to just face reality that these individuals that are coming over, I mean, they will become a burden on our system. And the United States, we just can't handle it.
Yeah, it's a few, I had a study here that I had cited earlier today, but it's because you're often going to hear the globalist progressive left say, well, they pay sales taxes and revenue from their presence here. And the National Academy of Sciences did a report and netted out any of those potential revenue sources, and net $296 billion a year drain at the date of this report, which was years ago. We're looking at a lot larger than that now. And it projected a net drain from those people and their offspring even 75 years from there. The one exception was among college-educated individuals who had arrived. They actually were not a net drain on the country. But even if they weren't, you can't tell me. So even if they're not a drain on the public expenditures, there is a crowding out effect in job creation. All right, I understand and I subscribe to the idea that the economy can always grow, that it's not always a zero-sum game. But in the types of jobs that we're looking at, you're not going to expand the output of the country because of this excess labor pool. You're simply going to diminish the employer's sense of obligation to pay higher or more competitive wages for that. And I was just blown away with these numbers that came out last week about the percentage of illegals that are engaged in our agricultural services. I mean, everyone knew they were there as seasonal workers. Everyone knew there was a certain percentage of them, but no one can even really say from a market standpoint, what would these jobs actually pay if they were simply held by U.S. citizens and they were U.S. citizens committed for that job? And don't tell me Americans won't do that work, because I've seen Americans do all kinds of bold, brave, physically taxing work of all sorts of types to earn a living. We don't know what those wages would potentially be, and that could have been the very difference between between Americans pursuing some of those jobs and not pursuing some of them. And particularly with youth, I mean, we have an enormous unemployment rate among the very young 16 to 18-year-old population. It's even higher among Hispanic Americans and African Americans. And it's one of the reasons that I believe, if we're looking at which I don't like to look at it this way, but if we're looking at the Republican Party, the conservative agenda, as having a deficient amount of support among Hispanic and African Americans, I'm not sure there's a better issue to take as the forefront and the lead, into those communities and argue, look what the modern Democrat Party is doing to your job opportunities, to your kids' job opportunities and futures, and to your wages. Why in the world would we place the interests of an individual from Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador above a struggling American of any ethnicity trying to get in the job market?
Well said, Michael. We appreciate your insights on this foreign policy special. I have a couple questions left for you. North Korea seems to be trouble again for the United States of America. Democrats criticized President Trump because perhaps they thought he seemed too buddy-buddy with Kim Jong-un. But of course, they weren't threatening us there for a few years, which was a change of pace from what we had seen before that. But it appears that they have no respect for the Biden administration. Where do you think this goes from here?
I think the big question that's not definitively answered is, does Kim Jong-un maintain any degree of autonomy from China? Meaning, is he able to develop or conversely cut back on the nuclear weapons development program that we know they're heavily engaged in North Korea on their own? Or is this operating as just sort of almost some, almost a colony of China's Communist Party? I have long subscribed to the fact that I don't think there's a lot of independent decision making in Pyongyang. And I think we saw some degree of suggested evidence on that, given the number of trips he started to make to China once Trump was making progress on these issues. All of a sudden, China wanted to meet with him, and you remember he was taking those train rides into meeting with the CCP. So my view is like the Vietnam War, where Nixon and Kissinger kind of concluded that there was value in getting China on our side because it would constrain, end the Korean War before it. Some of their engagement in those regions, I think there's good indication that that's the case here too. I think if China decided today that they don't want nuclear weapons in North Korea, that entire system could be dismantled with pretty quick ease. Now, there are other individuals who say no. The military and components of the government, including his sister, have enormous political standing or strength, and that there is some autonomy there. But clearly, in all respects, I mean, Reagan's line, peace through strength, another simple statement like Trump, like several of Trump's, is what it's all about here. I mean, if we're weak with North Korea, if we're weak with Iran, if we're weak with China, if we're weak with Russia, they're going to take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. And we're at a position on China where I started to look at the magnitude of offenses even before the pandemic that they haven't come clean on and really, in my view, settled with us, like the hacking of the presidential personnel office, stealing of essentially every clearance file of any federal government official in this country, including my own. And then I looked at the hacking of credit agencies like Equifax that they were behind, and the magnitude of hacking that they've been engaged in the private sector, and attempted to steal secrets of our vaccine development. Where's the accountability on any of those things? I mean, by the way, on this a final point I didn't even mention on China's vaccine. I'm going to probably try to write something on this here in the next week or so. I had a suspicion about this, but hadn't really dived into it. And I wanted to understand kind of, what process of authorization these vaccines from China were put through. And as you know, they have a handful of approved vaccines. Well, the equivalent of their phase 3 testing, which of course demonstrates the efficacy and is sort of in a lot of ways a definitive sign off on major side effects, they have refused to release while they're exporting this to an estimated 500 million people around the world. And if you look where those countries are, it's an extraordinary large percentage of Latin America. And then it's, parts of Asia and a good part of Africa as well. Looked further into it and discovered that none of their earlier phase trials had ever been peer reviewed. So the process that the Pfizer vaccine went through, for instance, that the SmithKline vaccine went through, that the other American vaccine, the Moderna vaccine went through, none of that has been applied here. And again, World Health Organization missing in action, no commentary, no criticism. And our party and our leadership should be out front on this stuff, in a big way.
Absolutely. Well said. Another thing I wanted to ask you is you spent a lot of time in around the Bush administration, and the approval rating for the war at the time was very high. President Bush,
over 90%.
Yeah, over 90%. Can you explain to people perhaps who don't realize how long were we supposed to be over there originally? How did things get off track during the Obama administration and venture off from what the Bush administration had planned in the Middle East?
Well, I'm on the 90+%. I'm citing George H.W. Bush, who I worked for after the expeditious liberation of Kuwait from the Iraqi invasion. So my position today, which I think you guys share, is, if I looked at that to me was a well-supported, legally sound, intelligence sound military incursion that was executed with near perfection, minimal fatalities, and Kuwait today is free because we took, and I've been to Kuwait a number of times since then, is free today only because we took those steps. The engagement in 2003 in Iraq and in Afghanistan 2 years earlier is now to the point where, as I pointed out a few days ago, we're deploying individuals into Afghanistan who literally were not born when 9/11 happened. So that seems like yesterday to me. The reality is, my judgment, that Trump had this stuff right too. There were a lot of ominous, dangerous forces to U.S. interests in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan that he properly took care of. ISIS nearly completely obliterated. Al Qaeda in Afghanistan nearly completely obliterated. Al Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula damaged considerably. And Syria and Iraq, kind of left a power vacuum. That power vacuum started in the Obama administration, where Iran's presence and support of Shia militias and other forces gained a considerable amount of influence in Iraq. They still have influence there. And they've got IRGC forces that they put into Syria. Well, we didn't go over there with the goal of expanding Iran's influence geopolitically in that region. And we certainly didn't go over there to see a bunch of great Americans at the beginning of their lives lose their lives for a cause that is not clearly defined. So I look at it now and I say, look, and I don't want to oversimplify this, because they're all three complicated situations. There are indisputably dangerous forces in all three countries. There's always something more we could do. But I think we were at the point, and largely still are at the point, where the incremental risk and cost to our country is not being rewarded with any incremental dividend or payoff. So Afghanistan, Al Qaeda, not a major, still operating obviously, but not, not like they were after 9/11. The Taliban, just to be clear, is a major political sort of institutional force in Afghanistan. We can dislike them all we like, and there's plenty of bad political and Islamic influenced movements around the world. You have to distinguish between those who are enjoying some degree of support and those that are, literally exclusively terrorist entities. The Taliban is not realistically going to be eliminated. The way to approach it is exactly the way we've done. You stabilize the country, the parts of the country that they don't control to the best of your ability. You don't get into prolonged nation building. You get out as soon as possible, and you facilitate negotiations, so that hopefully that country can stabilize. But that country has been a conflict for its entire modern existence, and it's been a product of a number of foreign incursions, and not just the Soviets, but the British before it, and others. It's proven complicated. It's not likely going to be settled by foreign presence. And Syria and Iraq, I think we're at a point where regime change in Syria is not advisable. I mean, who would realistically run Syria in the, Assad is a horrible dictator. He has used chemical weapons. He's been engaged in atrocities. We've, put a lot of penalties, sanctions, etc. We've launched missile attacks into some of these facilities. But, I think one of the things you always need to keep in mind, and Reagan understood this too, is that before you ever remove a government, you better have a very clear understanding of what is going to follow it. And there's no better example than that than Iran, right? I mean, 1979, the Shah of Iran was very imperfect. He was abusing human rights. There was political opposition. He was struggling with some of the internal political complexities and indisputably acting selfishly as it related to power preservation. But Carter undermined the Shah in the name of human rights. We got a regime that was vastly worse from a human rights standpoint and an actual enemy of this country. And the Shah was not an enemy of this country. Same thing happened with Castro's ascent in Cuba. Batista was dictator. You can find an great number of human rights abuses that occurred, and corruption, state corruption that occurred under Batista, but he was not an enemy of the United States. There wasn't going to be a missile crisis, a Cuban missile crisis, with Batista running Cuba. But he was very, foolishly isolated, and we were oblivious to what was going to come next. And that's my point about, kind of where we are in the world right now, is that you have to really prioritize what matters most to U.S. interests, and realize that this idea that we can police the world or democratize the world, which quite honestly I attempted to do in my time at the International Republican Institute, U.S. government-supported programming, went into a whole bunch, Turkey, Kuwait, a whole bunch of non-democratic countries at the time, and did my best to help strengthen civil institutions. There's just simply some degree of limitation on what you can do in those places, I mean, I had women attempt to shout me down in Kuwait when I talked about the importance of women's right to vote. And as much as I disagreed with the perspective, I did respect the fact that woman was a citizen of that country and I was not, and I can get on a plane and leave in a few weeks. She's going to live the rest of her life there. So we're in a new phase. I kind of look at it as, the United States was never very inclined to engage globally after the American Revolution. We weren't firstly a power. Our founders warned us about some of these things, about prolonged and unbreakable alliances or hostilities. And then we were drawn into it, World War I, World War II especially, where there was a recognition that we were, the singular force in the world that was able to deter and roll back major crises that would have altered the complete course of this world. And thankfully, we were there to do those things. But it's like the immigration debate. It's also true we were a country of immigrants. Does that mean we have to always be a country of immigrants? At 330 million, I mean, are we a country of immigrants at 500 million?
Right.
Are we a country of immigrants at 1 billion? I mean, this idea that Biden's buying into, that 1 million legal immigrants that we're already bringing in is not enough, isn't matched by any economic or demographic or other reality that we confront in the country. And a lot of these immigration programs, like the H-1B visa program, are scandalously anti-American. That's an anti-American program. I mean, they're bringing individuals in. You can see these stories all over the place where the American worker is being forced to train this foreigner who knows nothing about the function. We're told that these are people that have really refined, difficult to identify areas of expertise in the technology and other areas. Turns out, for the most part, they have no such expertise, not even, in some cases, not even preliminary exposure to it. And it's all about wages. So that's where I think we are in the world. I mean, I think we need to look. I don't want to ignore Russia. They're a nuclear power, for starters, so you can't on that basis alone. But we got to get our best minds and our best strategy in place in a bipartisan way around China and what we're going to do here, because these guys have a plan in short order to be the leading power in the world. And they have shown the ruthlessness that I think suggests they're not going to be particularly kind in their ascent.
And that's scary because, like you said, the Biden administration, they are aware of these things, but it's as if though they are acquiescing. They're okay with America being second fiddle or third fiddle. They're willing to concede this ground so that China can move up. And I know that there are a lot of people that I've heard say the same thing, that, America, we've had our day. It's time for us to let someone else take center stage. And that is so dangerous because that someone else is not looking out for the interests of the world. That someone else would prefer if there were these different classes of people, the ones at the top and then the ones at the bottom. So
well, all these DHS officials in the Biden administration who say that we have some sense of obligation to take these people. And now, as you correctly pointed out earlier, we're spending this extraordinary sum of money to literally build hotel facilities for them when we have people, Americans, sleeping on the street tonight because they don't have a place to stay. It should be, incentivized, encouraged to take in 3, 4, 5, 6 of them into their their Bethesda and Georgetown homes and give up their spare rooms and bring them in. I mean, if don't just talk the talk, walk the talk. But they're not about that, of course. There's nothing to do with that. I'm not going to sacrifice, anything for the purposes of their political designs, sadly.
We're made to look like the bad guy, while these other people are made to look good, which it's really unfortunate that we're here. And I would have never thought in a million years, my short life, that we would be where we are now with an administration that doesn't seem to care about America's greatness. And when you do talk about America's greatness and making America great again and keeping America great again, it is relegated to you're a racist and you're speaking white supremacist, et cetera, when that is far from that. America is the greatest country, and that is the reason why we have people trying to come here. They're bombarding our borders to come here. No other country do people want to come to. And for that greatness to say, hey, I can make it here if I have the opportunity. If I get there, I can do it. And we do want that. And that is the reason why we have policies, immigration policies, or at least I thought we had, whereby people could come here and show their net worth, and then get in line and say, hey, I want to become a citizen. There is a process. This is what I've done. This is what I can contribute, as opposed to coming here and then we have to take on that burden for years and years to come. It is most unfortunate.
It's like everything changes. I mean, so many things that once were de facto indisputable needs of this country are not today. Things that were not once needs are today. This idea that we're just perpetually going to be guided by this whole cliche that we're a nation of immigrants, and that there is a poem that was later inscribed on the Statue of Liberty, wasn't even there when the French gave us the Statue of Liberty, and that its meaning has somehow been twisted and to be that anyone and everyone can just sort of come on in here. That's not a policy that is either A, sustainable, B, in the American interest, or C, justified by any current status of this country at all.
Yet here we are today. Yet here we are. So we're coming up on the bottom of the hour. Definitely want to thank Michael Johns for giving us this brief history lesson. I'm sure that he mentioned a lot of things that a lot of you were completely unaware of, and it's just food for thought. We can never forget where we are, where we want to go, and where we could possibly end up in going if we're not standing together. And if we sleep, that could be it. I have had nothing more to point to you other than to look at what happened on Friday in Alaska with the meeting with China and Biden's administration. I mean, it did not look good at all. And we've got to hope, pray, and work toward making certain that in 2022 and 2024, that we're back in office with the right people. As Michael said, we need our brightest bipartisanship, and we need people who love America and want to see America succeed and not fail and not blame America. We're not perfect. By any means are we perfect. We make mistakes. But by gosh, I mean, when you look at us compared to other countries, we're light years away, but we could lose that ground if we snooze. We could definitely lose that ground.
Well said, Rob. Thank you so much to Michael Johns for joining us. You can subscribe to his Telegram channel. Just type in Michael Johns into the search box, and his channel will pop up. He posts all of his updates and interviews that he does throughout the week on his channel. Highly recommend you subscribe to that. You could also follow him on Twitter at Michael Johns. We appreciate your time. We learned so much today. We covered the border crisis, Russia, China, North Korea, the Iraq War. So much we went over in this hour and a half. We appreciate your time, as always, Michael.
It's always a pleasure, guys. Appreciate all you're doing. Keep it up. We'll talk soon.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
We'd like for you all to join us on Tuesday when our guest will be candidate for New York Mayor, Bill Pepito. He'll be joining us. He's a former police officer, and he will talk to us about his race for New York City mayor. We know that there are a lot of other candidates that are out there, but Bill is from the Republican side, and we want you to join us and hear what Bill has to say.
That's right. And then anyone who's into the lockdowns, be sure to join us Thursday with Fire Captain Cox will be joining us again to talk about his restaurant. And then a New York chef will also be joining us to talk about his restaurant and how the lockdowns have affected them. Thank you.
So if there's nothing else, thank you for joining us. Be safe, be wise, and remember, let's keep America great again. Let's make America great again. We can do it if we stick together. Have a good night. Thank you.